Chapter 1. The Tune That Never Finished. Oh, it stopped again, muttered Miss Calthorpe, peering through the dusty window of the Harrogate cottage. She always wound that silly music box twice in the evenings, never once. The postman, who had just finished slotting a letter through the brass flap, glanced over his shoulder, stopped halfway through the tune. It did. Sounded a bit off, too, inside. Evelyn Harrogate sat still as stone in her armchair, hands resting peacefully upon the embroidered shawl in her lap. The French music box beside her ticked softly. Its mechanism had ceased midway through Claire de Luna melody. She had played faithfully every evening for 30 years. It was the milkman who knocked first. No answer. Then the grocer's boy, dropping off her usual loaf, knocked again. By midday, Constable Merrin forced the door open. She was pronounced dead by tea-time. Natural causes, said the village doctor. Most likely her heart. Inspector Crayford from Market Lilling was summoned only out of custom. He stood over her with his arms crossed. Quiet life, quiet end, he declared. It would have ended there. The village mourned, arrangements were discussed, and Beatrice Linton, the niece, was telephoned in London. She promised to arrive within 2 days to handle the estate. But on the third morning, a cream envelope bearing a Belgian stamp arrived in him Isley. It was addressed, in unshakable handwriting, to Monsieur Hercule Poirot. I do not enjoy the countryside, Poirot muttered, straightening his cuffs as the taxi slowed along the narrow lane. Too many leaves, too few facts. He had received the letter from a former pupil of Evelyn Harrogate now. A music professor insisting her death was not as peaceful as the village believed. The music box, she wrote, was a warning. Miss Harrogate was frightened. Monsieur Poirot, she once said, it would sing the truth when I no longer can. Please come. And so he did. At the door, Inspector Crayford barely suppressed a sigh. I'll indulge you, Monsieur Poirot, he said briskly, though I fail to see the necessity. Dr. Wilberforce certified the death. Elderly woman, brittle heart, peaceful. Poirot's gaze travelled to the music box on the table beside the armchair. It had not been wound since Evelyn's passing. A tiny brass key lay beside it. He reached out, gently lifted the lid, and turned the key twice. The mechanism whirred, stuttered once, then began its familiar tune, Claire de Lune, drifting softly. At the 24th note, the cylinder jammed. With a sharp click, Poirot leaned forward. Something was not quite right. With a gloved hand, he tilted the box slightly, inspecting its underside. Mon Dieu, he murmured. There was a fresh, fine scratch beside the seam of the base. Too precise, too recent. Crayford rolled his eyes. Really, Poirot, must we dramatize a music box? Poirot straightened. I do not dramatize, Inspector. I observe. Then observe quietly. There's no foul play here. The niece arrives this afternoon to collect the belongings. You may ask your questions, but I expect no theatrics. Poirot did not respond. His mind was already assembling the outline of something not yet a picture, but not quite a shadow either. Beatrice Linton arrived shortly before 4 o'clock, slender, stylish, and wearing a scarf printed with crimson lilies. She swept into the cottage like one accustomed to claiming space. She hugged a loosely filled handbag and clicked her heels against the tiled floor. "I wish it weren't under such circumstances," she said with a dramatic sigh. "But Aunt Evelyn would have wanted things handled properly." "You were close?" Poirot asked gently. "Of course. I visited 3 weeks ago. Actually, she was. Well, always a bit peculiar, but lucid. And the music box? Did she speak of it?" Beatrice made a face. "That thing. She was obsessed. Refused to part with it even though I had a buyer lined up. It's antique worth thousands. But she said, and I quote, 'It still sings of war.'" Poirot tilted his head. "Peculiar? No. She was always eccentric, a wartime relic herself. You visited her the evening before she passed?" Beatrice hesitated. "I left late afternoon. Actually, we'd argued. I wanted to take the box. She wouldn't allow it. Said, when it plays its last note, someone will answer for the silence." I didn't know what she meant. You inherited everything. She didn't have much, just the house, the music box, and a few dusty books. Poirot's eyes moved toward her handbag. "That receipt peeking out. Mademoiselle, it is for an antique dealer." Beatrice tucked it away quickly. "Just an inquiry I made before I knew she'd passed. I thought she'd reconsider selling." Poirot said nothing. He let silence do the talking. Beatrice, however, was practiced at surviving silence. "If there's nothing else, I'd like to begin sorting things." "Certainly," Poirot said, bowing slightly as she stepped into the back room. Poirot turned again to the music box. He wound it once more. The melody began again, elegant and familiar. But it did not finish, and neither, Poirot suspected, had Evelyn. Outside, a storm cloud passed over the narrow fields, casting a dim light through the lace curtains. Poirot stood in the doorway, unmoving, eyes fixed on the winding key. His hand hovered over the scratch. Something was hidden. He just needed to find the tune that knew where. Chapter 2. Poirot enters the silence. "I should think if there were a mystery here, Inspector," Crayford said. The next morning, "It would be why you've come all the way from London to poke about over an old lady's heart-giving." Out. Poirot, immaculate in dark grey with a navy pocket square precisely folded, merely nodded. "You are a man of conclusions, Inspector. I am a man of sequences." Crayford blew into his tea. "Sequence is simple enough. Woman old, woman dies." They stood in Evelyn Harrogate's sitting room once again. The music box remained on the side table, untouched since Poirot had wound it the day before. Crayford had reluctantly agreed to let Poirot review the scene in more detail. Before the niece returned to pack up the house, Poirot moved with careful steps. "You say there was no sign of distress, no struggle, no mess, correct? And yet," he gestured toward the table, "1 cup, half full, cold tea. No second cup. No signs of lunch. It suggests someone came for a brief visit, perhaps even unexpected." Crayford shrugged. "She lived alone. People drop by all the time. Vicars, students. You know how village women are." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Would you be so kind as to allow me to speak with the doctor again?" he asked. Crayford groaned audibly. Dr. Wilberforce has already said it was a soft failure of the heart. No toxins. No bruising, no bruising. Poirot interrupted gently. And yet, there is a faint darkening near the temple, just above the cheekbone. I noticed it yesterday. Crayford blinked, probably from falling as she died. Possibly, Poirot said, but a fall alone would not bruise so cleanly. Crayford set his cup down with more force than needed. I don't appreciate this line of implication, Poirot. I imply nothing, Poirot said smoothly. I observe. Allow me to gather a few facts. If in the end the lady died peacefully, I shall leave you to your very tidy conclusions. Poirot's next visit was to the rear garden. He stepped carefully over the flat stones leading to a cluster of marigolds and rosemary. The window to the sitting room stood open, no sign of forced entry. No trampled grass, everything in order. Still, he crouched briefly and ran a hand along the sill. A faint streak of dust had been disturbed recently. He straightened slowly. She had a visitor, he murmured, one who came quietly. At the edge of the path, he noted crushed earth near the stone angel, nothing deep, but irregular footprints, smaller than his own, not quite fresh. The back garden gate creaked as he opened it and stepped onto the narrow alley that curved behind. The neighboring vicarage. Curious, he said, half to himself. A visitor on foot. Perhaps. He returned to the house, finding the niece once more sorting through drawers in the parlor. Beatrice glanced up from a small stack of sheet music. I'd forgotten how much old paper she kept. Scribbled nonsense. In margins, mostly. I'm tossing most of it. Poirot stepped forward delicately. If you do not mind. I should very much like to see anything she wrote in the final days. Beatrice raised a brow. You really believe she didn't just pass naturally? Poirot smiled thinly. I find it safer to believe less and observe more. With a reluctant sigh, she handed over a folder of half-faded notes. Nothing useful in there. Some letters to the vicar, some music fragments. I think she was trying to write again. Terrible habit at her age. Poirot flicked through the pages carefully. One scrap caught his eye, a short scale progression, with odd notations in pencil, not musical terms, numbers. Small, tight handwriting marked beneath certain notes. He folded it and slid it into his pocket. By midday, Poirot found himself seated in the vicar's small study. Reverend Thomas Lyle, a man in his early 60s with soft graying temples and a thoughtful expression, served weak tea with 2 digestive biscuits. I was terribly saddened. Lyle said Miss Harrogate was a private woman, but thoughtful. She left flowers at the memorial each month. Without fail. You knew her. During the war? Poirot asked. Lyle nodded. Briefly. Yes. We met in Paris. Actually, odd coincidence. I was working with displaced clergy through the Red Cross. She was involved in something musical, but I gathered there was more to it. You suspected she was involved in intelligence? Lyle gave a small chuckle. One doesn't speak of such things, Mr. Poirot. But she had the air of someone who had seen more than she said. Did she confide in you? Only in fragments, the vicar replied. Toward the end, she grew more troubled. Once said to me, some tunes are Some tunes are. Tunes are safer left unfinished. I assumed it was a metaphor. Poirot's brows drew close. Did she mention a music box? Of course, Lyle replied. She said it helped her remember things. That it still carried a burden. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And what did you think she meant? Lyle hesitated. I thought perhaps she regretted something. She was sharp to the end. But memory plays tricks on the aged. Poirot took a long breath. Do you recall when you saw her last? 3 days before she passed. I brought her a hymnal. She'd requested. We sat for half an hour. She was rather distant. Poirot watched the vicar carefully. You brought no tea? No. I didn't stay long enough. Poirot nodded, but said nothing further. As he rose to leave, the vicar placed a hand on his shoulder. She was kind, Poirot, but kindness sometimes hides deep sorrow. I believe. Evelyn carried a silence too long. Poirot paused at the door. Monsieur le Reverend, it is not silence that concerns me. It is the echo. That evening, Poirot sat once more by the music box. He wound it carefully. The melody played smoothly. Gently dot at the same note. It stopped. A mechanical click, sharp and unnatural. He placed a finger on the tiny scratch once more. Examining the seam under the bass, I wonder, he whispered, if the music truly ever finished or if someone stopped it deliberately as he stood. He heard a knock at the door. Beatrice entered, pale. There's something I forgot, she said. It may be nothing, but the day before she died, Evelyn sent me a letter. Poirot turned, eyes narrowing. And what, mademoiselle, did it say? Beatrice opened her handbag slowly. It said, if anything happens to me, tell someone to. Listen, the tune knows. Poirot's expression did not change. But in his mind, the melody had just begun. Chapter 3. Anise and a legacy. Poirot turned the letter over in his hands, inspecting the faint handwriting. The paper was thin and perfumed, folded with care. Beatrice watched him from across the small parlor table. I wasn't sure what to make of it, she said, fingers fidgeting with the clasp on her handbag. She had strange turns of phrase. Near the end, I assumed it was just age. Poirot read aloud softly, if anything happens to me, tell someone to listen. The tune knows. He looked up. Why didn't you mention this sooner? Beatrice hesitated. I didn't think it meant anything. You said she likely had a visitor. Well, maybe she was frightened, but she never said why. Poirot rose slowly and walked toward the window. The late afternoon sun filtered through lace curtains, dust dancing in its beam. Did you believe she was afraid? He asked. I don't know. She was agitated, yes, but also stubborn. Beatrice looked down. We argued, you see, about the box. Poirot turned. Tell me, mademoiselle, why were you so insistent on taking it? I wasn't insistent. I merely suggested it might be time she let go of old things. She gave a small smile. I'd found an interested buyer. It's a rare piece, 18th century French mechanism. Could have fetched thousands. Poirot tilted his head. And what was her reply? She told me it wasn't for sale. Not ever. Said, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the silence. Beatrice shook her head. I told you, she had these strange moments. You left angry. She folded her arms. We said our goodbyes. She kissed me on the cheek. I drove back to London that afternoon. Which day was this? Tuesday? She died Wednesday morning, didn't she? Poirot gave a small nod. So you were not in Henslow the night she died, no. She hesitated, then reached into her handbag and retrieved a slip of paper. Here, I kept this in case anyone asked. Parking receipt from the art district. I was in Chelsea Tuesday evening. You can check. Poirot took the receipt, noting the time stamp. You are very prepared, mademoiselle. I run a gallery. We deal in provenance daily. A soft knock interrupted them. Inspector Crayford entered without waiting for a reply. Well, he said, eyeing Beatrice. Then Poirot. You've had your time, monsieur. Found your mystery? Poirot gestured toward the letter on the table. Miss Linton has just shared a note written by her aunt. It suggests Evelyn feared something, perhaps. Someone, Crayford snorted, a dying woman's poetic musings. You'll find plenty of that in villages like these. Poirot gave a mild smile. Perhaps. But consider this. Inspector, why write the note at all? Why give it to her niece? The day before her death? Why insist someone listen to the tune? She was eccentric, Crayford said. She used to talk to her cat in Latin. Don't mistake a flair for drama as evidence of a crime. Poirot simply nodded. Even so, I would like to understand more about the message she intended to leave. There may be something within the box. Crayford frowned. The box again. Poirot stepped over to the music box, still closed upon the table. It is curious, tampered with. I believe, after its last repair, a scratch beneath the casing, fresh, and the melody it does not play through. He opened the lid and wound. The key once. The cylinder turned, gears clicking softly. Claire de Lune played, sweet and fragile. It halted, precisely on the same note. With a mechanical click, Poirot looked to Crayford. You see? The jam is not age. It is interruption. I believe someone interfered with the mechanism. Crayford rubbed his temple. A village full of gossip and an unfinished tune. And now you're telling me someone came in here to silence a box? I am suggesting, Poirot said carefully, that someone came to silence what the box carried. Later, that evening, Beatrice resumed her sorting of Evelyn's belongings. Poirot stood by the bookshelves, observing her hands as they paused now and then lingering over letters, discarding others. He spoke without looking at her. Mademoiselle, do you know if your aunt kept journals? Not that I ever saw. She replied, just loose sheets, bits of music, half-written poems. She lived in fragments. Poirot crouched near a low drawer, opening it slowly. Inside were bundles of old sheet music, some faded, others nearly blank. Between them, he found a stiff brown envelope, sealed in wax dot. He held it up. And this? Beatrice shrugged. Unopened, probably old bills. Poirot broke the seal gently. Inside was a single page of handwritten melody neatly notated, but with odd markings, pencil dots, triangles, and Roman numerals beneath certain notes. He stared at it for several seconds. What is it? Beatrice asked. Poirot folded the page. A variation, and perhaps a key. A key to what? He looked to her gravely. That, mademoiselle, is what I intend to find out. The next morning, Poirot returned to the small clockmaker's shop at the edge of the village. Cyril Deeks was hunched over a desk of cogs and wires. "I'd hoped you'd visit," Deeks said. "Without looking up, strange business with Evelyn. You knew her well. She brought in her little music box now and then. Fussy thing. Said it had stopped playing properly. Last repair was 2 weeks ago." Poirot nodded. "Did she ask you to inspect the cylinder?" "Yes, said it once held. Something important. She wanted me to check for compartments, false seams." He looked up. "But there was nothing. And yet," Poirot said gently, "the box now contains a fresh scratch beneath. Would you have noticed such a mark?" Deeks's brow furrowed. "I should think so. I always polish the base." Poirot stepped closer. "Then someone accessed the inside after your repair. Someone looking for something Evelyn remembered too late." Deeks's face darkened. "You think she was killed?" "I think someone wanted her silence to remain intact." Deeks swallowed. "You're not the only one who's asked about the box, you know." Poirot raised a brow. "Oh, couple months ago, woman came asking about French War-era music. Devices, said she was researching coded melodies. Didn't give her name. Mid-30s. Bit tense." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "Describe her." "Brown hair. Tall. Wore gloves even though it was July." Poirot didn't reply immediately. He was thinking of Evelyn's message again. "Tell someone to listen. The tune knows. The music, it seemed, had been trying to speak for some time, and someone else had already tried to hear it." Chapter 4. The broken melodized small bell above the door jingled as Poirot stepped once again into Deeks' clock shop the following morning. "I should like to see the inner workings of the music box," he said plainly. Cyril Deeks, wiping oil from his fingers, nodded without surprise. "I thought you might." He led Poirot to a narrow workbench cluttered with springs, gears, and tiny screwdrivers. Deeks retrieved the music box carefully from a velvet pouch and placed it under the lamp. "After your last visit," he said, "I examined the mechanism again, took it apart piece by piece, and it's been tampered with," Deeks said quietly. "Someone removed the cylinder and reinserted it. Badly. A small pin was bent out of alignment just enough to make the tune stop midway." Poirot gave a faint smile. "An interruption. Not mechanical failure, then?" "No. Intentional." Deeks confirmed. "But crude. They weren't looking to damage it, just to stop it at a precise point. To signal something, maybe." Poirot bent closer, examining the small rotating cylinder with its fine, pointed pins. "And this pin?" he asked, pointing to one near the 24th note, the exact place where Claire de Lune always faltered. "Scraped," Deeks said. "Freshly so. Whatever happened recently. I repaired it for her 2 weeks ago. It wasn't damaged then." Poirot tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the desk. "Could someone else have brought it in before her death?" Deeks shook his head. "No one came here but Miss Harrogate, and she was quite adamant that no one else should touch it. She always stayed while I worked on it." watched me the entire time. Poirot raised a brow. She feared it might be tampered with. Seeing that way, the two men stood in silence as the weight of the implications settled. Then Poirot said quietly, "Have you ever seen anything hidden inside a music box? Messages. False compartments." Deeks hesitated. "Not in this one. But the design is old, French. Could be custom built during the war. I've heard of mechanisms like that, boxes used to transmit coded messages, notes and rhythm concealing patterns." Poirot reached into his coat and withdrew the notated music sheet. "Found in Evelyn's drawer. And what would you make of this?" Deeks took the page, eyes narrowing as he examined the unusual Roman numerals and markings beneath the melody. "Not musical notation," he muttered. "At least not standard. Looks more like cipher overlay. You see, numbers under certain bars. Repeating sequence, almost like frequency. Or names," Poirot suggested. Deeks looked up sharply. "Names?" Poirot smiled without humor. "Or dates, perhaps even initials. Whatever it is, Miss Harrogate was trying to remember something lost. Something this melody once helped conceal." Deeks stepped back. "Then someone else must have known what it hid, and wanted it silenced again." By noon, Poirot was back at the Harrogate cottage. The rooms had begun to take on that peculiar emptiness that arrives when personal belongings are slowly stripped away. Beatrice was wrapping a porcelain vase in newspaper when Poirot entered. "I should warn you," she said without looking up. "I'm not keeping much. Just a few letters and her silver brooch." Poirot sat gently in the chair opposite her. Miss Harrogate was very deliberate. Every object in this home had a purpose, even the music box. Beatrice gave a slight snort. She treated that thing like it had a soul. Perhaps it did, at least to her. Poirot placed the music sheet on the table. "Do you recognize this?" Beatrice glanced at it. Just one of her strange fragments. She scribbled things like that all the time. You never asked what it meant. She was always writing melodies, or reworking old ones. Honestly, I stopped asking years ago. It didn't seem to mean anything. Poirot gave a small nod. Yet I believe this one did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the repaired cylinder. The melody was deliberately altered to stop at a particular note, just there, near the end. Your aunt was sending a message not just in the music, but in the interruption itself. Beatrice frowned. A message to who? That, Mademoiselle, remains to be seen. He studied her expression as she carefully folded the newspaper over the vase. Her movements were neat, controlled, not careless, but not sentimental either. "Did you know anyone else who might have taken an interest in the box recently?" he asked. She paused. "No one I can think of." She didn't entertain many visitors, aside from Reverend Lyle and that moody girl from the village, Margot Penberry, I think. Poirot nodded slowly. The music student. She studied with Aunt Evelyn years ago, but they fell out after some row over a scholarship. Do you believe Miss Penberry could have returned to settle something? Beatrice considered the question. Margot was always tightly wound. But to kill, she shrugged. No idea. If she thought Evelyn had ruined her future, perhaps. Poirot gave a polite smile. You are remarkably frank. I prefer clarity, Monsieur Poirot. Especially now that someone's cast doubt on whether my aunt died peacefully. Poirot folded the music sheet again and rose. Then I shall continue. Seeking clarity, till later that afternoon, Poirot returned to the village's modest church. Reverend Lyle received him with a calm expression, though a flicker of curiosity passed his eyes. "You've been busy," Lyle said. "Truth requires motion," Poirot replied. "Tell me, Monsieur le Reverend, do you recall any conversations with Miss Harrogate in which she mentioned the unfinished tune?" Lyle paused, thoughtful. "She said many things in the last few weeks. But yes, I recall her referring to a melody she never completed. She said it reminded her of something from Paris." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "From the war?" Lyle nodded. Slowly, "She said it was linked to a night when everything changed. A betrayal. I think she called it a betrayal," Poirot repeated softly. "And did she say who betrayed whom?" "No," Lyle replied, "but she asked me once whether guilt could carry through a melody, whether a song could forgive." "And what did you tell her?" Lyle smiled sadly. "I told her memory is our greatest act of penance." Poirot studied him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned to leave Dot as evening settled. Poirot returned to the cottage and sat by the window with the notated sheet music spread before him. He traced the Roman numerals beneath the notes, humming the melody quietly. Claire de Lune. Interrupted, ciphered, burdened Dot, then a soft click. He looked up to see Beatrice standing in the doorway, holding a folded note. "This," she said quietly, was wedged behind the back panel of the dresser. "I don't know if it's important." Poirot took the note. The handwriting was Evelyn's. Only one line was written. "If I forget the names, the tune will remember." Poirot did not speak. He did not need to. The box had not played its last note just yet. Chapter 5. Echoes of war. The next morning broke with dull skies, and the soft patter of drizzle against the windows. Poirot disliked English rain. It lacked elegance. But today, the weather suited him. Silence often lived in grey. He walked to the vicarage alone. Reverend Lyle received him in his study with mild surprise, though he quickly offered the detective a seat and a pot of weak Darjeeling. "You return quickly, Monsieur Poirot," he said, pouring with a steady hand. "There is no time to waste," Poirot replied. "The past, you see, does not stay asleep as easily as we pretend." Lyle sat, folding his hands. "You have found something, then?" Poirot withdrew the music sheet from his coat pocket and laid it carefully between them on the polished desk. "Your name, Monsieur, appears quite by accident in the cipher of this melody." Lyle's eyes dropped to the paper. His expression held, but Poirot saw the smallest shift, the lips pressed tighter, the shoulders subtly drawn in. "I don't see how," Lyle said quietly. "There are only notes here, and numbers," Poirot added, "placed under each bar. Roman numerals that correspond to initials when transposed to a simple substitution code. A rudimentary one used by the resistance during the war. This system is not unfamiliar to you, I think." Lyle did not answer immediately. Then he leaned back, clasping his hands over his lap. "I was a chaplain, Poirot. Yes, I knew the Resistance used music, smuggled codes into arias, passed messages, through hymnals. Clever, but dangerous. Poirot watched him with still, careful eyes. And Evelyn Harrogate was not simply a music tutor in Paris, was she? Lyle let out a long, slow breath. No. She worked with a cell that passed information from German-occupied quarters through to free French forces. She used her performances as cover. Her piano case once carried a coded radio crystal. Poirot nodded slowly. You were in Paris with her. I was stationed nearby. We crossed paths. I admired her courage. Courage, Poirot repeated softly. And yet, after the war, she left. Disappeared to this village. And never played publicly again. Lyle looked toward the window. She was changed. War does that. And you? Poirot asked, voice delicate. Were you changed, too? There was a long silence. Then, quietly, we made choices. All of us, some better than others. Poirot said nothing. The fire crackled faintly in the hearth. Rain tapped against the glass dot. Finally, Lyle turned back. You think someone came to silence her because of that music box? I think she feared someone would. And that fear, monsieur, is the truest clue I've found yet. Lyle shook his head slowly. She wanted to forget. But the past didn't let her. Poirot stood. She said once, the tune would remember, if she could not. And it does. Her silence was not forgetfulness. It was protection. As Poirot reached the door, Lyle's voice stopped him. I never meant harm, Poirot. Poirot turned back. Perhaps not. But sometimes harm is done, even by those who mean only to protect themselves. Back at the cottage, Beatrice was packing the last of Evelyn's books into boxes marked for donation. Poirot entered. Noting the absent-minded expression on her face, Miss Linton, he said gently, did your aunt ever speak to you about her time in France during the war? Beatrice looked up, startled. Rarely. She mentioned she taught at a conservatory briefly. Said Paris had changed her. She never told you she worked with the Resistance? Beatrice blinked. No. Good heavens, she wasn't. I mean, really, she was more than she appeared, mademoiselle. Beatrice sat slowly. I had no idea. Poirot nodded, nor did many. But I believe her time there is key to her final message. He moved to the mantelpiece, retrieving a small, framed photograph, Evelyn, standing beside a piano, younger and unsmiling. You said she argued with someone over the music box. Do you recall exactly what she said? Beatrice nodded. She said, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the silence. That's all. Poirot's voice dropped. It was never a sentimental trinket. It was a vessel. And someone, I believe, wanted to know what it still carried. That afternoon, Poirot visited the village hall, where a clerk helped him access old local reports and parish records. One particular name, mentioned several times in connection with returning war survivors, caught his attention. Lieutenant Thomas Lyle, discharged under exceptional circumstances in 1944. Accidental internment. The record read, released from German custody weeks before scheduled exchange. Poirot traced the signature. Evelyn's name appeared beside it. Witness. Liaison Translated. The dates didn't line up neatly. And the phrase accidental internment was too vague. To clean, Poirot stared at the file a moment longer, then quietly folded the paper back and left the hall without a word. At sunset, he stood again in Evelyn's parlor. The music box sat open on the side table, untouched. He wound it once, carefully. Claire de Lune began again, delicate, haunting. It halted, as always. On the 24th note, Poirot listened to the silence that followed. He counted it. For seconds, not 3, not 5. Then he closed the lid slowly. Beatrice entered behind him. "You're still here." Poirot turned. "The war ends, mademoiselle, but the consequences do not." She frowned. "You think someone from that time came back to kill her?" Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he asked, "What did she say to you about the music box the last time you saw her?" Beatrice leaned against the doorframe. "She said it had begun to sing again, that she heard it differently now." Poirot nodded once. "Then I fear," he said, almost gently, "it sang for the wrong ears." Chapter 6. What the box buried the following morning. Poirot stood once more in the small kitchen of the Harrogate cottage. The air inside the house was changing emptier, colder, as though Evelyn's presence were finally slipping away. He poured himself a cup of weak tea and stared at the coded sheet again. T. L. He whispered the letters aloud. Then, with deliberate precision, wrote the full name beneath the line. Thomas Lyle. Not a guess. A certainty now. He took a breath and folded the paper neatly before slipping it into his coat pocket. The time for doubt had passed. Beatrice Linton arrived shortly before midday to collect the last of Evelyn's silver. She seemed more tired now, quieter than before, her movements unhurried. Poirot greeted her with a soft, "Good morning, mademoiselle." She nodded. "I've arranged for the removal van to come tomorrow. It feels wrong, all of it, sorting her away like this. She lived here a long time, nearly 40 years. Beatrice paused. "I keep expecting to find something else. A message, a will, something more personal. But there's only that tune." Poirot sat gently by the table. Sometimes a melody is more personal than words. Beatrice gave a sad smile. She always did say music spoke when she couldn't. Poirot leaned forward. "I wonder, Miss Linton, do you recall a visit your aunt received not long ago? Someone unexpected, someone she might not have welcomed." Beatrice furrowed her brow. "Margot came by in late August. They didn't speak for long. I arrived shortly after she'd left. Aunt Evelyn seemed shaken, but she wouldn't explain." "What about Reverend Lyle?" She hesitated. "He was often here. They were friends." "Yes," Poirot said quietly. "Old friends." Beatrice paused at his tone. "You think he knows more than he's said?" Poirot didn't answer. He simply asked, "Did your aunt ever write to him? Letters?" "Possibly. There's a drawer upstairs she always kept locked. I never thought much of it. May I see it?" In Evelyn's bedroom, the locked drawer yielded easily to Poirot's fine tools. Within it, tightly stacked and bound in faded ribbons, were 24 letters. Most bore the same handwriting, strong, deliberate, feminine, Evelyn's. Each was addressed, To T. Lyle not sent. Not yet. Poirot opened the topmost letter and read. Slowly, Beatrice stood behind him, still and silent. You never answered for what happened. You said it was war, that we were surviving. But I have survived the silence longer than I should. You were released, Thomas. I watched you walk free. While Bernard never returned, I played for the wrong side once. I will not do it again. Beatrice read over Poirot's shoulder. Who's Bernard? Poirot closed the letter. A fellow resistance member, I believe. One who was caught when another escaped. You think Reverend Lyle betrayed him? Poirot didn't reply. I think Evelyn believed he did. He lifted another letter, dated nearly a year ago. I've begun hearing the tune again. The one we wrote together. You told me it would always carry the truth. Perhaps I was a fool to believe it, but it has stayed with me. Even as you drifted away from what we once were, Beatrice placed a hand on the drawer. She still loved him. Poirot gave a small nod, or never forgave him. That afternoon, Poirot requested a quiet meeting with Reverend Lyle. They sat in the church's vestry beneath the stone archway, where hymns once echoed louder than secrets. I have. Read Evelyn's letters, Poirot said gently. She did not send them, but she kept every word. Lyle's hands were clasped tightly together. Then you know. I know she believed you traded a man named Bernard for your own release. She wasn't wrong, Lyle whispered, but it wasn't betrayal. Bernard insisted. He was already dying, he said. One of us must live to carry what we know. Poirot studied him. Did Evelyn ever forgive you? She said she understood. But she changed after that. She played less. She spoke less. And when she moved here, I followed. He smiled faintly. I became the vicar of Hensler to stay near her. But she never gave you the box. No. Lyle's voice dropped. That she kept for herself. She said it remembered things she tried to forget. Poirot leaned forward. Did you enter the house the night she died? Lyle looked up sharply. No. Did you fear she might speak the truth after all these years? Lyle's eyes misted. I feared she might destroy herself over it. Not me. Poirot held his gaze for several long seconds. Then he said, the melody was not meant to accuse. It was meant to protect. Lyle turned away, voice raw. She used to say that music carried memory better than forgiveness. And she was right, Poirot said quietly. Back at the cottage, Beatrice was seated on the floor. Surrounded by papers Evelyn had once hoarded, Poirot entered with a quiet expression. There is one person I must now speak with, he said. The last visitor. Your aunt saw before she died. Margot? Poirot nodded. I believe the key lies not in the past itself, but in who feared it would surface. Beatrice looked uncertain. But what could Margot possibly want? Poirot looked to the music box. She wanted to be remembered, and your aunt could not offer that. Chapter 7. The student returns. Poirot stood beneath the crooked wooden sign of Penberry's Antiques and Repairs, tapping the rain from his hat. The shop was small, its front windows cluttered with chipped vases, broken cuckoo clocks, and tarnished brass. Inside, the bell jingled faintly. A young woman looked up from behind the counter, narrow-faced, sharp-angled, with deep-set eyes that held something older than her age. Her dark hair was pulled into a haphazard bun, and a pale smudge of varnish streaked one cheek. "Miss Margot Penberry?" Poirot asked gently. She hesitated before replying. I am Hercule Poirot." Her expression did not change. "I believe you were once a student of Evelyn Harrogate," he continued. Margot's jaw tensed. "A long time ago. She passed away last week," Poirot said. "You visited her not long before?" Margot nodded. She was still bitter. She made sure I knew it. "Bitter over what?" Margot crossed her arms. "I asked for help. A letter of recommendation. A contact, anything. I'm trying to teach music. To stay afloat. She said no. Told me my playing lacked feeling." Her voice grew hard. "I think she just didn't want to be reminded of what she used to be." Poirot studied her carefully. "Miss Harrogate's past was complicated. You may not know the full measure of it." Margot gave a dry smile. "You mean the war? The whispers?" Everyone in Henslow heard them. But she never spoke of it. Not to anyone. That silence, Poirot said gently, may have cost her peace. Margot stared at him. "Why are you here?" Poirot reached into his coat and placed the folded music sheet on the counter. "Did you ever see this melody?" Margot looked down. Her fingers moved toward it, instinctively familiar with notation, naturally reading the rhythm. Then she froze. Her lips parted slightly. She used to hum this. But she never let me play it. Said it was incomplete. Poirot nodded. "And what do you see beneath the bars?" Margot blinked at the Roman numerals. "Cipher." "You are clever, mademoiselle." "I wasn't clever enough for her," Margot muttered. Poirot tilted his head. "Did you resent her?" Margot didn't answer immediately. She held power. But she wasted it. She locked herself away in that cottage with her regrets and her boxes of secrets, while the rest of us scraped by. You wanted her to help. "You," Poirot said. "I needed her too," she snapped. "But she didn't believe in me. And the truth is, I think she was afraid of me, of what I might find." Poirot's voice dropped. "What did you find, Margot?" Margot stared at the melody again. The box. It played something strange. I heard it once. Just once. She'd left it open when I visited. The tune stopped halfway through, and I knew it wasn't broken. It was hiding something. She looked up sharply. I asked her about it. She slammed it shut and told me never to ask again. Poirot gave a small nod. "And did you?" "No." Margot's voice cracked. "I just left. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so, you returned." Margot's eyes widened. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot's voice was even. "I believe you entered that cottage the night Evelyn Harrogate died." Margot stepped back from the counter. "No, I didn't. I thought about it. I walked by, but the light was on. I couldn't bring myself to knock." Poirot said, "Nothing." "I swear," Margot whispered. "She was already gone when I returned the next day." Poirot's gaze didn't waver. "You returned." Margot's breath caught. I needed to hear it again. The tune. I thought it held something. Maybe a name. Maybe something she meant for someone else. Poirot took a step forward. You tampered with the cylinder. No, Margot insisted. I didn't. I tried to fix it. It stopped again, and I panicked. I didn't want anyone to think I'd touched it. Poirot narrowed his eyes. You left the window ajar. Margot's silence confirmed it. Poirot drew in a quiet breath. You did not kill her, but you were there. Margot sank into the wooden stool behind the counter, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to see me, to hear me. Poirot's voice softened. And instead, you heard her, through the music and the silence. Margot looked up, eyes rimmed red. What does it mean, monsieur? That melody? What was she trying to say? Poirot lifted the sheet gently. I believe it was a confession, but also a warning. Later that evening, Poirot returned to the cottage with a quiet heaviness in his step. Beatrice was there, sorting the last of Evelyn's scarves. She's lying, isn't she? Beatrice asked without preamble. Margot. Poirot sat beside her. No, not entirely. She came back. She tampered with the box, but she did not cause Evelyn's death. Beatrice's hands paused over a silk scarf with faded roses. Then who did? Poirot looked at her, eyes calm. The person who feared what the melody would reveal. Not its beauty, but its memory. Beatrice frowned, and the cipher. Poirot opened the folded page. It names someone, partially erased, but enough remains. He laid it on the table. TL. She never spoke it aloud. Poirot said, but the tune did. Beatrice was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, so she knew. All these years. Yes, Poirot said. And she carried that silence until the very end. But in death, she allowed the melody to speak. Chapter 8. Silence. Sherrod Beatrice returned the next morning with a question in her eyes and a stiffness to her voice. You said the melody speaks, Monsieur Poirot, she began. But to whom? Poirot sat near the hearth, the music box open. Beside him, he gestured for her to join him. To those who remember what they were not supposed to, he said simply, and to those who forgot to conveniently. Beatrice folded herself into the armchair opposite. You still believe someone silenced her intentionally? I do not believe, Miss Linton. I know. He leaned forward and gently tapped the folded cipher page resting on the table. She feared one person above all would learn she had remembered. That is why the music stopped on the same note every time. Not a malfunction, but a signal. Beatrice glanced toward the kitchen, where steam curled from the kettle. And Margot broke the silence, Poirot said. But she did not break Evelyn. That honor belongs to someone else. Someone Evelyn once trusted with her life. Beatrice went still. Reverend Lyle. Poirot nodded slowly. A name, concealed in cipher. A betrayal, wrapped in melody. And a silence carried for decades. Beatrice closed her eyes a moment, then stood and crossed the room. She reached into the high cupboard above the writing desk and pulled down a black tin box. Inside were photographs of Evelyn in Paris, in uniform, at piano recitals. Poirot joined her as she spread them across the desk. This one, she said, pointing to a photo dated 1943. That's not Bernard, is it? Poirot looked at the image. Evelyn stood with two men beside a broken bridge, all three in civilian coats, but with the eyes of survivors. One man, tall and dark-eyed, had his arm draped over Evelyn's shoulder. The other, standing slightly apart, wore the ghost of a clerical collar. That, Poirot said, is Thomas Lyle. Beatrice's breath hitched. She kept this. She kept the memory, but not the man. Poirot carefully turned over the photo. Faded pencil red, before Calais, the last night Bernard laughed. He looked at Beatrice. There was more to Evelyn and Bernard than friendship. Beatrice gave a slow nod. I think I always knew. Poirot visited the vicarage in the mid-afternoon. The rain had stopped, but the village air clung with dampness, heavy and watchful. Reverend Lyle opened the door with visible wear. You look tired, monsieur, Poirot said. I've had little sleep, Lyle replied, stepping aside. Guilt, perhaps. They sat once more in the study. Poirot placed the photo gently on the table between them. Lyle stared at it. Where did you find that? She kept it, Poirot said. All these years. Lyle exhaled. We told her it would get her killed. Keeping that photograph. Loving Bernard. Trusting me. You left him behind, Poirot said, in exchange for your release. Lyle looked down. I did, Poirot. Watched him. And when Evelyn finally remembered, when the melody returned to her, you feared she might speak it. I never wanted to hurt her, Lyle said hoarsely, but I asked her to let it go, to destroy the tune. She refused. She had already lived in silence long enough. Poirot's voice was low, but sharp now. You went to her that night. Lyle's head dropped. She told you no. She would not hide it any more. I only wanted to frighten her, he murmured, to make her promise never to speak it. But she looked at me with that same Paris stare, like she already knew I was a coward. And then, Poirot asked, she sat down at the piano. Lyle said, played the first notes of Claire de Lune, said it would be her voice now. Poirot's voice was cold, so you raised your hand, not in violence, but to silence. She fell, Lyle said faintly. I swear I didn't mean it. I only grabbed her wrist, but she stumbled. She fell against the hearth. Poirot closed his eyes for a brief moment. You left the window open, perhaps hoping it would look like an accident, a confusion in her old age. Lyle buried his face in his hands. Poirot stood. You may come quietly, monsieur. The vicar didn't move, didn't resist. He was already more ghost than man. By evening, the village was quiet. Beatrice stood beside Poirot at the edge of the garden behind the cottage, looking down at the bench Evelyn once used to sit upon in warmer months. She would have hated the fuss, she said. Poirot nodded. She would have preferred a final note, left quietly in a drawer. Beatrice turned to him. What happens now? Poirot looked toward the cottage, where the repaired music box sat still upon the mantel. You will sell the house, he said, gently. Keep what matters. Let go of what tried to hide. Beatrice gave a quiet smile. And the box. Poirot paused. Let it play, as she intended. That night, Poirot sat alone once more in Evelyn Harrogate's parlour. He wound the box and let the melody unfurl gentle, pure, unbroken. No silence now, only the music, and beneath it, the truth. Chapter 9. The second melody. Next morning, Poirot laid the folded sheet on Evelyn's writing desk. The paper was thin, brittle at the edges, and the ink had faded, yet the notations were precise, delicate, above the staff lines. Evelyn had written 3 words. For Bernard's ears on the Poirot stared at the melody for a long time, humming the first few notes quietly. It was not Claire de Lune, not even similar in key or rhythm. This was something else. Something private. Beatrice entered behind him, carrying a cup of tea. She paused at the sight of the sheet. "You found another?" Poirot nodded, eyes still on the notes. "It is a second piece, one I suspect even Lyle never knew existed." Beatrice leaned in, peering at the music. "Do you think it's just another code?" "No," Poirot murmured. "This is memory, poured into music." He placed the paper gently beside the first ciphered melody. "The first was a warning," he said. This is something else. A goodbye, perhaps, or a secret kept only for Bernard." Beatrice slowly sat down, her face unreadable. "I still don't understand why she would hide so much. She could have told someone. Me, at least." Poirot folded his hands. "People who carry great silence often do so because they are waiting for the right person to hear them, or the right moment." Beatrice exhaled, then looked toward the photograph still resting on the sideboard. "And now they're both gone." Poirot's voice was soft. "Not entirely." Later that day, Poirot visited Cyril Deeks once again at the clock shop. The young watchmaker raised an eyebrow at the sight of the detective. "Back again." Poirot handed him the new sheet. "Can you play this on a cylinder?" Deeks examined the melody. "Might take some adjusting, but yes. You think it'll unlock something?" Poirot gave a small smile. "I believe it will unlock someone." By late afternoon, the adjusted cylinder was ready. Poirot returned to the cottage, fitted it into the box, and wound it gently. The new melody began light and unfamiliar, but unmistakably Evelyn's touch. The rhythm was hesitant at first, as if testing the air. Then it deepened into something mournful and slow. Beatrice sat beside Poirot, listening in silence. "This isn't a code," she whispered. "It's her." Poirot nodded. "A confession." Through notes. She could not say it with words, so she composed it. They listened as the melody swelled, then returned to the quiet refrain with which it began. It ended, not abruptly, but with a single high note that lingered too long. A sustained breath like something held, and then let go. Beatrice wiped her eyes without speaking. "She loved him," she said finally. "All that time." Poirot's voice was low. "And could never forgive the man who lived in his place." Beatrice looked to him. "Then why keep Reverend Lyle so close?" "Because he was the last one who remembered," Poirot said. "She needed someone else to carry the silence." Beatrice stood slowly and walked to the window, arms crossed. "Will there be a trial?" Poirot hesitated. "No," the coroner ruled. "Her fall accidental. There is no proof beyond confession. But you believe he did it?" Poirot nodded once. Yes. Beatrice turned back. And you're letting him walk free. I am letting him carry the weight. Poirot's voice was firm. He will live with the truth. That is punishment enough. Beatrice didn't argue. Instead, she picked up the page of music again. What do I do with this? Poirot smiled gently. Play it. Share it. Let it breathe. That evening, Poirot returned briefly to the village hall, where Reverend Lyle had packed the last of his belongings. He would not remain in Henslow. The bishop had accepted his resignation quietly. No fuss, no scandal. They stood alone in the empty nave. I heard it, Lyle said softly, without turning. The second melody. Poirot nodded. It was not for you. No. Poirot paused. She didn't hate you. Lyle looked up. But she could never trust me again. Poirot said nothing. As the vicar picked up his case, he turned once more. Do you believe she forgave me in the end? Poirot met his eyes. No. But she did not need to. She left that task to time. Lyle nodded and walked away. Back at the cottage, Poirot stood in the music room one last time. The sun had dipped behind the hedgerows, casting long shadows across the rug. Beatrice had placed Evelyn's photo by the box. The music sheets were framed beside it, untouched. Poirot wound the box one final time and let it play. This time, he heard it differently. Not a warning, not a cipher, just a voice one silenced too long. Now singing freely. Chapter 10. If the melody ever finishes, Beatrice held the envelope in both hands as if it might vanish if she blinked. The writing on the front Evelyn's was unmistakable, elegant, upright, deliberate. To be opened if the melody ever finishes. Poirot turned from a music box and stepped toward her. You found this, she nodded, behind the piano. It must have slipped between the backboard and the wall. I was cleaning the dust. I never expected. Poirot motioned gently. May I? Beatrice hesitated only a moment, then passed him the envelope. He examined it carefully. The seal was intact, pressed with wax, unbroken, no date, no recipient. Only the conditional phrase cryptic and final. Poirot broke the seal with precision. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed, folded once. He opened it slowly. Evelyn's script flowed across the page in deep blue ink. Beatrice stood silent. As Poirot read aloud, if this melody has played in full, then I am gone. And if you have found this letter, then the truth I buried has surfaced at last. Bernard was not just a fellow musician or comrade. He was my future. He trusted me with his life, and I failed him. Thomas lied, not once, but many times. He promised that Bernard had made a deal, that he'd offered himself so that Thomas could walk free. But I discovered later, through coded transmissions I was never meant to read, that Bernard had not volunteered. He was named, sacrificed. I never confronted Thomas. Perhaps I was afraid. Perhaps I thought he'd deny it. And I would be forced to choose between the man I had once loved and the one I still pitied. The melody is Bernard's. We wrote it together. In the tunnels beneath St. Denis. He said it would keep him alive if he never returned. And so I kept it locked away and finished until the silence began to hurt more than the truth. Whoever reads this, no, I chose silence for too long. I hope you will not. Evelyn Poirot let the letter fall gently to the table. Beatrice sat down, her hand over her mouth. She knew, she whispered. All these years, she knew. Poirot nodded, and still she stayed. In this village, near him, carrying her silence like a penance. Beatrice looked toward the photograph on the mantel. Why would she do that? Poirot's voice softened. Because she still loved something about the man he once was. Or perhaps the man she hoped he could become. The following day, Poirot sent the letter and both melodies to a trusted solicitor in London. Along with instructions, they were to be archived under Evelyn Harrowgate's name and made public upon Beatrice's request. There is no shame in remembering, Poirot told her. Only in pretending memory is meaningless. Beatrice smiled faintly. She always told me music outlived lies. Poirot bowed his head. And now it has. As word spread of Reverend Lyle's sudden departure, and the quiet shuttering of the vicarage, the village of Henslow moved on reluctantly, as if unsure whether it should pretend none of it had happened. The parish newsletter offered a vague statement. The bishop sent no replacement. Poirot remained for 2 more days, helping Beatrice prepare a small recital in Evelyn's memory. The evening of the recital arrived, cool and windless. The local church hall, never built for grandeur, was crowded nonetheless. The villagers came, some curious, some somber, a few still cautious around the idea of melody as confession. Beatrice took the stage in a simple black dress. She placed the music sheets on the stand and gave Poirot, seated in the front row, a glance that trembled slightly at the edges. Then she began to play Dot Not Claire de Lune, not Bernard's coded refrain, but the second melody, the one never meant to be heard in Evelyn's lifetime. Its slow, aching notes drifted through the hall, each measure unfolding with restrained elegance. People listened. Dot, and in the final moments, just before the last high note rang out, Beatrice paused, her hands hovering, then pressed the key. Dot, it lingered. Dot, finished. Dot, complete. Poirot closed his eyes. For Evelyn, for Bernard, for every truth that once lived in silence. Later, as the chairs were being stacked and the crowd trickled out into the cobbled street, Margot Penberry approached Poirot outside the doors. Her eyes were softer now, less guarded. She played beautifully, she said. Poirot nodded. Yes, and with feeling. Margot glanced up at him. She would have been proud of her, wouldn't she? Poirot didn't answer immediately. Then, I believe Evelyn wrote the melody not because she feared being forgotten, but because she feared being misunderstood. Margot looked down. I understand that. Poirot studied her a moment. You have a gift, mademoiselle. Use it. But do not chase applause at the expense of meaning. Margot gave a short nod and walked away into the dusk. That night, Poirot packed his small case and prepared to leave Henslow. Before departing, he stood once more in Evelyn's music room. The box remained on the mantel, now silent. He placed the envelope and its contents inside, then closed the lid. Beatrice stepped in quietly behind him. Will you be all right? She asked. Poirot smiled faintly. Mademoiselle, I am always all right. I am only troubled by music that ends too soon. Beatrice tilted her head. And did this one end too soon? No, Poirot said. It ended precisely when it was ready to be heard. Chapter 11. Sussex Becomes the countryside train from Henslow to Sussex was slow, weaving between green fields and low stone walls. Under an overcast sky, Poirot sat alone in a quiet compartment, the recent memories of Evelyn Harrogate's music still echoing faintly in his thoughts. Her melody had finished. Yes, but the silence it left behind was oddly comforting, not haunting. A silence earned. Now. Another murder waited. He unfolded the telegram once more. Murder in Sussex. Unusual circumstance. Your presence requested. Jap. He knew Jap well enough. The word unusual was rarely used lightly. As the train pulled into the station at Little Bentham, Poirot stepped out and was greeted by the sharp scent of sea salt and damp leaves. A tall, broad man in a long brown overcoat waved him over. Inspector James Jap, familiar as ever, but with more grey at the temples than the last time they met. Well, Jap said, shaking his hand briskly. You look no worse for the village air, and you, Mon Ami, look like a man who has walked into something peculiar. Jap grunted. Peculiar's putting it mildly. They walked together to a waiting motor car. Jap driving, Poirot sitting beside him with hands neatly folded. Victim's name is Winifred Ashcombe. Jap began as the car bumped along the narrow country road. Elderly widow. Lived alone in a converted coastal chapel. Ah, Poirot murmured. So she prayed and paid taxes. She was something of a recluse, but well known locally. Bit of a local legend, in fact. People say she was a code breaker during the war. Real sharp one. Lived here since the 50s. Poirot's brow lifted slightly. And how did she die? Jap gave a sidelong glance. Here's the peculiar bit. Her body was found in her chapel home, sitting upright in a pew. No marks, no wounds, no sign of struggle. Fire still in the grate. Curtains drawn. Poirot tilted his head. Natural causes, perhaps. Jap shook his head. That's what we thought, until we found the message. He paused. Written inside a hymnal, on the final page, Poirot straightened. Japp continued, in black ink. This code has no key, but the answer still sings. Poirot went still, a code, and a song by. And no fingerprints on the hymnal, just her own. Nothing disturbed. Doors locked from the inside. Poirot folded his arms. And why summon me? Because we found a second note, Jap said grimly, hidden beneath her piano seat. He glanced at Poirot again. It said one name. Yours. Poirot didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, this Winifred Ashcombe. You say she worked in codes during the war. Jap nodded. Bletchley Park, head of transcription, team specialist in audio ciphers and musical notation. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Music again. It follows me. Jap slowed the car as they neared the crest of a cliffside lane. The old chapel came into view, stone, grey, and perched precariously on the edge of the sea. The waves crashed far below. A murder scene, wrapped in salt and wind. As the car pulled up, Poirot gathered his coat and hat with deliberate calm. "Let us see, Mon ami," he said. Whether the melody truly ended in Henslow or whether it merely changed its key, the interior of the chapel was cool, faintly musty. The nave had been converted into a sitting room, with warm rugs laid over the stone and shelves of books replacing pews. Yet the altar remained redecorated as a writing desk and the pipe organ still stood. Silent and tall, in the rear alcove, Winifred Ashcombe sat in the second row. Her body had already been moved by the time Poirot arrived, but the pew remained. Roped off, on the small cushion beside her had rested a worn hymnal. Poirot moved to the desk, where the pages had been carefully laid out. The final hymn had a message scribbled at the bottom margin, just above the musical bar. "This code has no key, but the answer still sings." Poirot traced the notes gently. His mind immediately returned to Evelyn's melody. The phrasing here was different, but the structure familiar. A song as confession, a cipher within music. He turned to Jap. "Has anything been taken from the house?" "Nothing obvious," Jap said. "No signs of theft. Jewelry's still in the safe. Her old piano untouched." Poirot looked toward it. A grand upright, well polished. He walked over and lifted the lid, exposing the ivory keys. Gently, he pressed one, a soft tone, then another. He began to hum. Jap raised a brow. "Do you know the tune?" Poirot gave the faintest smile. "Not yet, but I suspect I shall." In the back room of the chapel, Poirot found Winifred's personal effects letters, journals, and sheet music bound neatly in ribbon. One journal stood out, dated 19 for dot. He opened it carefully. Most pages were dry, terse records of intercepted code phrases and cipher keys. But halfway through, a passage stopped him cold. "Met with the H again today. She brings music. I bring numbers. Together, we shape silence." Poirot froze. E.H. Evelyn Harrogate. He read further. "She fears what TL might do, but she will not destroy the melody. She says it is his confession, whether he knows it or not." Poirot sat back slowly. JAPP had entered behind him. "Something." Poirot looked up, face unreadable. "Yes," he said, "everything." Chapter 12. The note that wasn't played. Sea wind scraped against the chapel's windows. As Poirot sat at Winifred Ashcombe's writing desk, the war journal still open before him, the room, though filled with the gentleness of her books and music, now felt weightier, like every silence it held was pregnant with a coded truth. He turned the journal page. E.H. insisted on leaving it unfinished. Said it would force him to listen, to wait. She believes the silences say more than the notes. Poirot read the line twice. Jap stood by the window, hands in his coat pockets, watching the grey clouds pile low above the cliffs. "She worked with Evelyn," Poirot murmured. "Not just during the war. They corresponded after, perhaps even recently." Jap turned. "You're saying this ties back to Harrogate's death? I am beginning to wonder if Evelyn's melody was never meant to be solved by one person," Poirot said. "But two." Jap stepped closer. "A duet." Poirot gave a slow nod. "Yes, a conversation across time. One begins it, the other ends it. He picked up the hymnal again and studied the scrawled phrase. This code has no key, but the answer still sings. Did the pathologist determine time of death? He asked. Night before last, Jap replied. Sometime after supper. No trauma, no poison, nothing conclusive. No cause of death, Poirot repeated. Yet she left behind a message. She expected to die or meant to disappear. Jap frowned. You think she killed herself? No, Poirot said immediately. This was not despair. It was precision, a deliberate act. She prepared something. He stood, walked back to the piano, and sat down. Lifting the lid, he again examined the keys. Clean, recently tuned. The inner felt barely worn. She played recently, he murmured. But only short sessions, not full pieces. Not unusual for someone her age, Jap said. None, but peculiar for someone preparing a message in music. Poirot gently opened the bench drawer beneath the piano and paused. Beneath the expected stacks of faded sheet music and manuscript paper, a thin sliver of vellum lay folded between the pages of a Bach prelude. He slid it out and unfolded it. The ink was faint. Notes floated along a single stave 12 bars, carefully penned in even, deliberate strokes. Poirot hummed them under his breath. Jap leaned forward. Another melody? Yes, Poirot said slowly. But not hers. Jap blinked. Whose? Then Poirot laid the page beside the hymnal. This is Evelyn's hand. I would recognize her spacing anywhere. Jap's brow furrowed. So, Winifred didn't compose it. No, she preserved it. Poirot tapped the final note. And here, you see how the last bar is extended. There is room for one more note. But it is missing. A mistake? No. Poirot said. A silence. He looked up, sharp now. She left it to be played. But someone silenced it. That evening, Poirot walked the length of the chapel garden. The hedges were overgrown, but the path remained intact, cobbled stones arranged in a spiral leading to a weather-worn sundial. At its base sat a single terracotta pot, empty. Poirot knelt and gently moved the pot aside. Underneath, half buried in earth and sea salt, he found a rusted metal box. JAPP. Just behind, gave a low whistle. How did you know? Poirot lifted it carefully. She wrote. The answer still sings. Not in the house, but outside of it. Inside the box lay a letter sealed in plastic, a reel of audio tape, and a military pin from Bletchley Park. Poirot opened the letter, brows drawn tight. If you have found this, then the melody has finished. Evelyn and I never broke our pact. The man who named Bernard, the one who used us both, now walks free, or perhaps not. Either way, he left no apology, only consequences. I have decided the melody must end, not to punish, but to preserve truth. It is the only thing that will not vanish. I fear I may be silenced before I play the final note. If so, let this be my voice. W.A. Jap swore quietly. Poirot remained still. She knew someone was watching her. He said, Who? Poirot stared at the signature again. The same person Evelyn feared. The same man both women carried in silence for half a century. Thomas Lyle. Poirot nodded once. He may have fled Hensler, but not before ensuring this melody would never finish. Inside the chapel, Poirot sat again at the piano. This time, he played the 12 bars Evelyn had composed, the ones preserved by Winifred, left untouched all these years, and on the 13th beat. Instead of playing the expected final note, he let the silence ring. He turned to Jap. "The tape? We must hear it." They played the reel late that night in a borrowed phonograph Jap had procured from the village hall. The audio was crackling, the voice tremulous but firm. It was Winifred. He came on Tuesday. He smiled, said he'd heard the tune was stirring again, that Evelyn had remembered. I said nothing, but he knew. He always knew. He asked me, "Why?" "Stir the ghosts," I said, "because they never left. I think he'll come back, not to finish me, just to ensure I stay quiet. But I have played the note, and it will outlive us all." The tape clicked off. Poirot leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. She was murdered. Jap said quietly, "Yes." Poirot replied, with silence. Chapter 13. The man who whistle floated on the night air, soft but unmistakable. For slow notes minor, lilting, unresolved, Poirot stood near the chapel window, listening intently. It came again. Jap crossed the room, drawing his coat tighter. "You hear that too?" Poirot nodded. The same for notes Evelyn played. When she was frightened, the same refrain echoed in her music box. "It is not merely a tune, it is a warning." Jap frowned. "You think it's him, Lyle?" Poirot turned slowly. "I think the man is not yet gone. Not truly." He opened the chapel door and stepped into the wind. The path wound down the hill toward the cliffs, then forked one direction leading to the road, the other toward the small, forgotten garden. Shed Winifred had left unlocked. The whistle came again. Poirot walked toward the shed. Inside, dust floated thick in the torchlight Jap held aloft. Gardening tools leaned rusting against the walls. A trunk sat in the corner, its lid slightly ajar. Poirot stepped forward and gently lifted it. Inside, neatly arranged, a clerical collar, a coat, folded, with a name stitched into the lining, Lyle, and beneath it, a journal. Jap peered over Poirot's shoulder. "Why keep a journal here?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He opened the first page. June 3rd saw her. Again. Her eyes are worse, but the music's still there, like she carries him with every breath. I tried to warn her. I asked her not to play it, not that tune. She smiled, said she'd already played it. Poirot turned the page. June 5th, she says Evelyn forgave me. But I know she lies. Evelyn never forgave. Not truly. She just waited. And then, written in trembling lines, June 6th I saw the box. I heard it play. It was not Bernard's voice. It was Evelyn's, still accusing, still watching. I didn't mean to push her. Just wanted the music to stop. Poirot closed the book. He was here, Jap, after Hensler. He watched Winifred, spoke with her, tried to stop her just as he did with Evelyn. Jap gave a low whistle of his own, so he did it twice. Poirot stood slowly. No, the first time was an accident. The second was a choice. By morning, the path of investigation had narrowed. Poirot returned to the parish house where Reverend Lyle had last resided in Sussex. The new tenant, a young curate with suspicious eyebrows, showed them inside without protest. "I've only just moved in," he said, "but there were a few things in the back room. Some letters. I didn't throw anything out. I assumed, well, some kind of clerical handover." Jap chuckled. "Not quite the kind you think." In a desk drawer, Poirot found the letters, 3 in total. The handwriting was Evelyn's. One had been sent a month before her death. _Thomas, you once asked me to bury it. I did, for 40 years. But Bernard's name still aches. Winifred has the music. I know she's kept it. If she ever plays it, you must not interfere. We are too old for shadows. Let it finish. Poirot passed the letter to Jap. He never obeyed her wishes, and he followed Winifred until her final day. Jap sighed. We've no formal proof of murder. No marks, no poison, just silence. Poirot tapped the journal from the shed. He confessed, in writing.